Hello and welcome everyone to the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. My name is Andy Erickson. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today. We're going to have a great talk and panel discussion. I want to thank the University of Minnesota Stormwater Technology Transfer Program for funding this work. I want to thank the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for partnering with us. And I want to thank all of you, the audience, for being here today to enjoy it. Today's presentation is going to be titled Performance of Stormwater Products and Practices, Why It Matters. And I'm excited for this talk because it's something that really pushes the boundary of where we are in the stormwater industry today. And I think it really sparks questions and discussion about where we can go and maybe where we should be going when we're thinking about stormwater in the future. And I'm excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Seth Brown. Dr. Seth Brown has over 25 years of experience in the water sector and is the principal and founder of Storm and Stream Solutions, LLC, and serves as the director of stormwater programs at the Water Environment Federation from 2010 to 2015, is not doing that anymore, but is currently serving as the executive director for the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance. And you can read his full bio on our website. But what you will not find there is one of Seth's talents. Now, Seth, as you probably expect, travels quite a bit to give presentations, sit on committees, sit on councils, provide information, talk to legislators and regulators. But something else he travels for is for music. He actually is a drummer that plays in a band here and there and fills in when needed, and quite accomplished, played some very large arenas and stadiums, probably larger audiences than I've ever presented for. So that's exciting and something you can talk to Seth about after the seminar if you're interested. So without further ado, I'm going to let Seth come up and take over the stage. Please help me welcome Seth.
Thank you much. All right, thanks for being here. I didn't know you were going to talk about the music. I wasn't ready for that. So is the mic working? Just want to make sure. Thank you. I got the thumbs up. All right. Well, thanks for everybody for being here. And then you're gonna bring up the slides. Cool. Yeah, and I took the lift over here, and last time I was here was 2020, I think. Is that right? Right before COVID. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. I'm not trying to bring pandemics wherever I go, but I took a lift over here, and we pulled up to like the parking lot, and I'm like, I can see the buildings there, but I can't get from here to there. So thankfully, I made it across the bridge, so that was helpful. So anyway, so you can see what we're talking about today, and you heard from Andy what the deal is, and I'm talking for like 35 minutes, something like that. All right. So I'm gonna just dig into it. Assuming this. Oh, did I go? Yeah. Did I go all right? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, this is new to me. Yeah. So the driving question for today. And then for my talk, and then for the great panel we're going to have with Todd Shoemaker, Liz Stout, and then who else are we? JB, is that right? John. Oh, Luke Martinkosky. Yes, of course. So that'll be after we're done here. But I think the theme for the whole day, or the whole panel here, and my talk is about, as you heard, does performance matter for stormwater in general? And hopefully by the time that I'm done talking, you will hopefully feel like yes is the answer. I'm gonna try to get there. Before I get there, of course, you want to provide a little bit of background. I'm actually a native Minnesotan. Grew up like Prince. I try to purify myself in the waters of Lake Minnetonka all the time at the Crescent Beach and the beaches in Excelsior, where I'm from. And you can see my family. I brought my family back there. My son, he's a little bit older than that now. He's 13. And my wife and my parents. We took the tour around the Lake Minnetonka. So that's part of my water legacy. Graduated as a skipper, which is always interesting to tell people when you go somewhere else for college. I was a skipper, and they're like, "What does that mean?" But anyway, outside of the Minneapolis area, people don't understand that as well. But took great pride, and there's other skippers in the room. I can say that, right? That's cool. Yeah. Okay. I was also born on World Water Day, March 22nd. So I was destined to work in water, is the point, from the land of 10,000 plus lakes. And also, the legacy of, I was born in 1973, which is pretty close to when the Clean Water Act was passed. And Jim Oberstar was part of that. So there's I felt like I didn't have an option. I had to work in water is my point here. So then for college, I went down to Memphis, went down to the River City, stayed in water, went into water for my profession, spent a lot of time in northern Alabama and all the TVA lakes down there. So I got to see a lot of different contexts of water and how it impacts people's life. Now I live out on the East Coast. I live in the DC area. My wife's from Rhode Island. We go to the beaches, which she went to as a kid, Southern Rhode Island. You can see my son. He's 13. He's a lot bigger than that, but he does about the same thing still. Because if anyone has any kids like that, you know how stupid they are. But they're great. They're wonderful. But I spent a lot of time in Rhode Island and the Chesapeake Bay and live in Northern Virginia. So just got to see a lot of one of the benefits. We were talking about getting, John Chapman and I were talking about how, it's fun getting old. I'm kidding. But it's one of the good things about getting older is you get to you get to see more of the world and you understand the value of a resource like water. So just sharing where I'm coming from on that front. So okay, so on to the serious stuff. So this is the agenda. What I'll be talking about. I'm going to give a little bit of background on the organization that I've been part of, helped to set up, and then of course Minnesota's a foundation of that as well. So that's the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on at the national level because I'm a national person, so I feel like I should do that as part of what I do, but spend more time on why performance matters and what we're doing about it to address that. So just in the context of NMSA, just so you know where I'm coming from, we've been around since 2018, so it's relatively young, but six years old. We're a coalition. So we don't have individuals that are members. We have organizations that are members of our national organization. They're primarily state organizations, and Minnesota is part of that. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we're the only national organization that's focused solely on the MS4 program and the sector and representing MS4s. There's a lot of groups at the national level who touch on stormwater and MS4 issues, but we're the only ones who do it day in, day out, all day long. Our motivation for forming was just basically we're trying to mature the sector, trying to make it be more proactive on the policy side rather than simply reactive. And then we also want to connect and unite. There's 7,500 MS4s across the country. Most are small and mid-sized. It's hard. They don't have the resources to be part of a national organization oftentimes. So we're trying to work as much as we can in the context of these type of events, online meetings and seminars, because it's hard for a lot of folks to get out to national events. So we're trying to connect and unite MS4s and also kind of just raise the level of awareness on the value of stormwater overall. But our vision is very simple. With like a lot of other organizations, we want to help provide clean water, like a lot of others. Our action areas are, we do a lot of different things, but they really boil down to these 4 areas, which is sector support. We're trying to do everything we can to support MS4s and MS4 organizations. That's our primary mission. We also, because messaging and communication is such a big part of it, especially for a young sector like ours, we spend a lot of time trying to just raise awareness. And that's a really hard thing to do in the national level in Congress and in EPA, because stormwater is always 252nd on the list of important things in the infrastructure sector. We're trying to raise it up at least a couple slots. So that's one of the big things that we're working on. Education is fundamental to any 501c3. So we're always focusing on that, providing technical information. We spend a lot of time on the policy and advocacy side, and Andy mentioned that as well. So as far as our coverage is concerned, we have 25 state organizations, which is pretty good for a 6-year-old organization. So we have half the country, a little bit more if you include all the MS4s that are in the networks of these state organizations. And we also have MS4s that are joining us directly. So Washington, D.C., Baton Rouge, and Thurston County, Washington, which is really Olympia, Washington. And we're starting to get more and more of those. Minnesota is not only a member, but was a founding member and has been a leader in the national level and NMSA overall. So you guys have a lot to be proud of. So that's the context where I'm coming from. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I want to talk a little bit about the things that we do so you understand what we work on. Talked about policy and advocacy. One of the things that we've done for 8 years now, I think that's right, is hold a national stormwater policy forum. So if you ever want to learn more about what's going on at the national level, we've got another one coming up April 8th this year as part of what's called Water Week. And that's just a week devoted to water issues. We had to carve out half a day. That by itself was monumentally difficult to do, because water and wastewater takes a lot of space, a lot of oxygen. So it's a half a day from 12 to 5 Eastern time. You can watch virtually. You can come in person. I know there'll at least be one person from Minnesota. Randy Neprash is going to be attending and involved. We do this in conjunction with the Water Environment Federation. We've been doing that for a while, and then now we've been focused on the National League of Cities and National Association of Counties as co-hosts. And I think MCSC, the Minnesota City Stormwater Coalition, is an affiliate of the National League of Cities, right? So these things all tie together is the point. So if you want to learn more about what's going on at the national level, you can check this out for free. That's the kind of stuff that we do. Oops, sorry, hit the wrong button. Another thing that's we've only started this year is we established National Stormwater Day, which it seems like we just discovered stormwater. That's not what we're trying to say. But we recognize there's all these different stormwater awareness efforts going on around the country at different times. Wisconsin has one, and there's some places in Arizona and all across the country. So what we wanted to do is raise awareness of the awareness. I guess it's a little bit meta. Of these different events that are going on, and celebrate that, you know, the phase 1 MS4 program was promulgated November 16th, 1990. So we chose that day as National Stormwater Day. We set up a website, stormwater.day, that has all this information up there. You can download any of the promotional toolkit information that we have. And we had a webinar for like an hour, I believe, hour 15 minutes, something like that, free, just like this. And we had over 500 people register for that and check that out. And we just kind of celebrated what we do, which doesn't really happen that often. Take stock of where we've been, what we're doing, where we're going in the future. So again, we're trying to raise awareness of that. And it seemed like there was more interest in. I thought there'd be 5 people who would register. There were 500, so that was pretty good. And another thing I wanted to highlight, the last thing I want to highlight here, is that we focus on, again, education and outreach. So we have a lot of webinars and training that we're setting up. We're starting to do some. We've got some basic stuff. We also have a pretty good YouTube channel with a bunch of, you know, again, free, obviously, past webinars that aren't that old, because we're not that old, but on things from source control to electronic reporting, things like that. So you can check that out if you want to. There's the bit.ly link on that. So anyway, just to let you know where we're coming from. And then a couple things on national level issues. There's a lot going on. And I'm not a lawyer. Are there any lawyers in the room? That's the first thing I should ask, actually, in every single talk I give, so I can carefully choose my words or not. There's no lawyers. So, all right. Or at least if there's any lawyers, I guess you're smart enough to not identify yourself. So a lot of text up here. You don't have to go through all of this, but the 3 big issues that are going on at the legal level that folks may or may not be aware of are the Chevron deference, Maui ruling, and how it deals with groundwater, and then the waters of the U.S. So I want to hit on these. And the one I want to start with is Chevron deference. As anyone in the Chevron doctrine I'm just kind of curious, how many people know about this at all? Okay, about half of you. Okay, at least so. I don't know how much people get into this. I went down a rabbit hole on this. I wrote an article. It's the best thing to do. I mean, you force yourself to write an article on something, and you learn a lot. But anyway, this goes back to basically what's the authority for federal agencies to make rulings and to make interpretations of law. And that comes from a 1984 Supreme Court decision that it was Chevron versus NRDC, I believe. Basically, the bottom line is that what came out of that ruling was that if there's a ruling that was coming up or a question that comes up, and the question is, did Congress speak to this question specifically? If it's not, oftentimes Congress doesn't spell out. They'll talk about, hey, let's clean water, but they're not going to say the specifics and be prescriptive about how that's done, right? So oftentimes you get past that first question, and then the next question is, does the regulatory agency that's making this interpretation, is it permissible? Is it reasonable? So is it in there? Do they have the experts to make those decisions and whatnot? And if yes, then you defer to that agency. This was at the time not really a big deal, but since this ruling, this became the most cited administrative law and ruling that's ever been out there. So it's a huge deal. And for a long time, the politics have shifted. I mean, I won't get into the details, but the politics have shifted significantly. And there was a hearing this past fall on this, and just based upon the question that came up, it sounds like it's very reasonable to think that they're going to overturn or significantly change this doctrine. And if that happens, then going to weaken federal agencies, regulatory agencies, and it's going to go to the courts and Congress. And Congress, they can barely put their pants on. So I can't imagine they're going to play a role in really making definitive environmental policies here. So it could throw things into chaos or maybe not, but that's what a lot of folks think. So this could be really big, and we'll find this ruling this spring. The next is Maui, which is basically we're putting groundwater injections or into what's called lava tubes that made their way into the nearby coastal waters. And the question is, can you do that if you're impacting waters of the U.S. or nearby waters and discharges? The point was that if you do this and it acts like a discharge, like a direct discharge, it is a direct discharge. And you might say, well, this is not a big deal, but what if you have a pipe that goes into a stream? Clearly, that's a discharge to water of the U.S. What if you cut it off 10 feet below it gets to the stream? Is that still a discharge? Right. So the bottom line is there was guidance that was released on this based on this ruling that came out that said if it's similar to a discharge and impacting this water, then it is. But what does that mean technically? Right. So there was some guidance put out in 2021 by EPA, then they quickly rescinded it and they released some in 2023, late in 2023. And we haven't found out what that's, what the bottom line is or the rulings on that on the final level. But the thing that's helpful in the stormwater context is they had a design and performance provision that said if you're discharging water into a facility that is designed to perform in a certain way, provide infiltration and treatment, you're likely to not be on the hook. Is the point. So and the new language that came out in 2023 was not doesn't include that, but includes language that suggests it. So anyway, put that on your radar as well. I don't think it's going to be a huge deal, hopefully. The last is waters of the U.S., and basically this has gone back and forth and back and forth. And the most recent ruling basically pulls it back even further. Intermittent streams are no longer included. And one of the things that we fought for a lot, and again, I'll point to Randy Neprash here in Minnesota, fought for exclusions, which used to be in waters of the U.S. definitions, are not included as an exclusion this time. So we'll still push for that. I'm sure Randy still push for that, and we'll all push for that. But that's the deal. There's a lot of other things going on at the national level. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the point is, you can look at this whole list of things here. There's a lot going on at the national level. So you might think to yourself, why should I care about what's going on at the national level when I have my local program or my state program to deal with? This is just a small list of what's going on. And I would suggest to you that the more that locals and state organizations get involved, the more they'll be like, wow, there is really more going on than we ever realized. And we need to have input from as many as we can to be effective in addressing input on all these issues. So anyway, I'm gonna just get through this. I just want that was the point to take away. Now on to what we're really talking about. Does performance matter? And you can say to yourself, well, there's good and bad, right? I always ask, there's good news and bad news. What should we hear first? Well, let's hear the good news first on performance. The good news is that there have been some wins. We see source control happening. Copper has been taken out of brake pads or is on the process of being phased out in California, as an example. There's a lot of great research finding out about emerging contaminants all the time. And so we're finding ways to address it at that level. So source control, I think, is a positive thing. On the awareness side, we are, for the first time ever in 2021, stormwater was included in the ASCE infrastructure report card, which is a big deal. It kind of puts us at the table with other major infrastructure sectors. And we worked a long time for that to happen. And they confirmed recently it's going to be part of the next iteration, which is in 2025. That's a great thing too. So you can see the little girl's very happy about that, right? We're all happy that we're at the table with the big guys, right? And we're also seeing a historic level of support for infrastructure generally, water infrastructure generally, and stormwater as well in the Infrastructure Jobs Act, right? So that's a good thing. So those are the good news. But there's always bad news sometimes too, right? And I told you there's a report card, but report cards aren't always good, right? So the little girl that was really happy back here, right? She was so happy that she got a report card, but then she looked at her report card and she found out that we got a D in our sector. So we have a lot of work to do, and we're in a tough situation. So the question, you have to start doubting yourself. Are we really doing what we're supposed to be doing? Are we effective or not? And there's a somewhat dated national publication that came out in 2009 from the National Research Council, Urban Stormwater Management in the United States. A lot of input from a lot of folks around the country. Basically said, the current approach that's being taken is not going to adequately control the contribution, stormwater's contribution to water body impairment. That's a pretty big statement to make. Now, again, that's dated. Things have changed since this time, but that's a data point about sector leaders may have some doubts. Another thing, there's been a series of national level statistically significant surveys of MS4s, what their needs are, what their interests are, and whatnot. One of the questions that we've asked it was 2018, 2020, and 2022, the last two iterations, 2020 and 2022, we specifically asked, can the federal MS4 program meet clean water goals in the long term? And you can see in 2020, it's like a third, yes, no, unsure. Now it's gotten even worse, right? 40%, over 40% say no. So even folks running the programs themselves are like, yeah, I don't know if this is, is this gonna get us there, right? So there's some, we have some doubts. I haven't said that it's not working out, but I spend a lot of time giving talks like this and listening to folks, and I think I'm gonna retitle myself as a stormwater therapist, because I hear a lot about the challenges in stormwater, and I think sometimes we all feel like this guy who's got his head in his hands. He's ironically sitting, looks like on a beach, so maybe he's looking at the water, thinking about, does it matter? Does performance even matter? I don't really know. So we've got poor stormwater self-esteem. Being in Minnesota, I have to inject every Minnesota angle I can on this. So brought an Al Frank in here, and those who are old enough, like me, others who are too young, I can tell. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, right. Remember Stuart Smalley, and he said, doggone it, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and all that stuff to make himself feel better, right? Positive affirmation. Well, doggone it, stormwater is important, should be our theme. We got to bounce back from that. So why is that? Well, because this is the water quality issue of our time. I've shown this many times, but I still think it's worth talking about. Back in 1970, when the Clean Water Act was put together, most of the issues on the blue part of that diagram there, of that pie chart, were traditional point sources: wastewater, industrial waste, whatever. We had rivers on fire, for God's sake. I mean, they got really good at putting out fires on rivers. That tells you that there's a time for a change needed, right? And when we're talking about non-point and point source, non-point in this context includes ag runoff and urban runoff, just to be clear. But if you fast forward 40 years, and this is based upon a piece written into 2010 by William Ruckelshaus, who was the first EPA administrator, the only person who did it twice. He's talking about things have changed over the last 40 years, looking back on it. And now the problems, the drivers for water quality are exactly the opposite. Right? Most of the issues are ag runoff, urban runoff, those type of things, when we're talking about impairments. But the whole pie chart is clearly gotten that. So this is our time. We have to think about, though, as we're moving forward, we're going to think about performance. How certain are we now? And I found there's a ton of literature on this, but I cited two, one from California, from an organization that's got the greatest sounding SCWRP. That's their I can't remember, Southern California something water research. There it is. Yeah, Coastal Waters Research Program, SCWRP. I think the genius is in the acronym, in my mind. But anyway, they looked at 81 BMPs and see how they were performing, and they said there's an order of magnitude in the uncertainty, regardless of BMP type or pollutant. And you can see just the wide ranges, and they use different methodologies for how they were measuring performance. And in various types of contexts, there's just wide ranges of, how things are performing. The other one was from Marcus Aguiar at Virginia Tech. He looked at 176 monitoring studies in Virginia that included many other stormwater control measures. And he came up with the same or a similar type of result in a different part of the world, significant level of performance uncertainty. And then there's, like I said, there's a lot more out there. The point is that I think we lack certainty. So what can we do? We have to ask ourselves, how well do stormwater products and practices work or perform, right? There's no national organization that addresses that. So that introduces the Stormwater Testing and Evaluation for Products and Practices program, which is STEP, another not as clever acronym, but one that I thought was pretty good because it's positive, right? It's forward moving. This was started by the Water Environment Federation a long time ago, 2012 or so. It's been kind of a low developing organization or a program that has been taken over by NMSA in 2021 or so. And we've been accelerating the development of this. So the goal of the STEP program is to meet this need, right? This lack of so you said hold down the right there it is. I just want to do this at least once because it's pretty cool. And so that that statement right there, right? That no national organization. Okay, well we set up a national organization. We're setting it up right now. The point is to increase overall performance. That's what we hope to do. That's an outcome that we want to have, and we don't want to do that not by lowering up the playing field, but leveling it and making it a higher playing field so that we have more confidence that what we put in the ground and what we spend money on, invest in, is actually going to work. And ultimately, if it does, it's going to improve water quality, which is what we all spend our time doing away from our families, which is why it should be something we want to get something out of. You can think about STEP as a consumer reports for water or for stormwater. That's the shorthand on that. That's what we're trying to do. So what do we do? What do we not do? We don't set up standards, but we promote the generation of testing standards. We oversee the testing process. We verify testing results, and we provide technical support. That's really what it comes down to. What we do not do is we do not perform the tests ourselves. Great labs like the ones here and others do perform the testing, and we do not certify products for use. That should be done by the states and jurisdictions, just to be clear about what we do and what we don't do. In terms of promoting the generation of testing standards, we are relying on ASTM, which is really, it's the gold standard for engineers and scientists in looking at technical issues and setting up standards. And the point is that we're focused on developing testing standards that say this is how you test product X for pollutant Y. And we're going through that. That's only been around for 3 or 4 years, I think. So Andy Erickson here is the chair of that here in Minnesota, and so we've got great leadership moving forward. But this is the technical basis for the STEP program. We will only evaluate and verify technologies, products, and practices that have an ASTM standard. So we're trying to make sure that there's more and more standards being developed. It's not an easy process, but we need to get more and more folks involved. We have a pretty robust committee. I'm the member secretary, so it's my job to get more folks to join. So if there's any interest, please let me know. We need more and more academic students and everyone to join as well. But the value of this is that it enhances the trust in verified data by using something that's so credible and so highly cited in the sector. Standardized testing helps us verify. So the standardized testing provides this apples to apples, credible testing that is the basis for verifying that things have been following this standardized testing program and methods and processes. So that's the kind of handshake between those two aspects. This is the kind of the dumbed down version of what we do and as far as overseeing the testing process itself. The way it starts is that we have an application that's sent in. STEP, us staff, Mike Trojan is working with us, which is great, helping us to do this. We go through and make sure that all the paperwork is right. The quality assurance project plan, or the QAP, has been set up correctly. Testing is done, and we verify that that's done. And we also use a third-party group of unbiased technical professionals that provides that objective view of the testing results. And so we verify that this data is legitimate. And that's really the power to this. So it goes, we provide a proof of verification, kind of a summary of that. Hey, you've been tested this much. You claimed you got 80% TSS removal under these type of conditions. We found that it's actually 82%. Great. They can use that then and go to request certification for use in different jurisdictions, and to whatever state, locality, or wherever else. They either get certification or they don't. That's outside of our hands. But that's how STEP works. And so we're in ETV, an environmental technology verification. These are set up in places like Japan, Europe. There's an ISO ETV standard that's set up. EPA used to have one. They let it lapse. So this is part of us jumping in on the stormwater side to provide, again, the standardized, consistent, credible review, which is really needed when there's questions about performance overall. The question that we provide answers for and technical support on are listed here. I'm not going to go through all these, but the point is that if someone provides a testing report, here's the data. A lot of folks at the local level will say, oh, okay, what do I do with this? How do I make sense of this in the context of my program? How do I do sizing? How can I make decisions? So we provide guidance and information on that to make it useful. And again, I talked about verification versus certification. Verification says we're going to verify a performance claim. Certification means that you can actually use this in your jurisdiction. Again, we're not going to provide that certification, because we don't hold the permit. So what's the value? Kind of getting back to the big picture. What's the value of STEP? We feel like if we need to take stormwater seriously, and that is a premise that NMSA makes, and I should clarify, STEP is a subset or a program of NMSA. We need to have informed decisions. We need to enable that. We need to have a national marketplace, especially for proprietary products and technologies. We need to lower the barriers to entry, and we need to accelerate innovation. We have a lot of catching up to do in our sector compared to others. So we hope that this is one of the values over there. And really the biggest value overall is that this is the number one, that first bullet up there, providing verified performance data that's useful, that's something that can be trusted and understood, is the most that we can do, so that we can understand, hey, we're gonna allow this technology or that technology. We're gonna pick winners and losers, but we have trusted information that we understand as part of that. So we also use what we call a CAFE plan approach, which means it's not a one size fits all. Some states say, hey, it's got to be lab testing that we make our decisions on. Some say field testing. We say we don't care. We're going to do both, and you guys can make your decisions based upon what you want to do. So we're not being prescriptive on how that should be done. As far as and other things that again provide more informed decisions. Again, the technical guidance that we provide is easily accessed, understood. We hope, and we're trying to get more and more. We have a stakeholder committee that provides us feedback on that as we move forward. And what comes out of this is an expanded toolbox. There's some jurisdictions who said, "Nah, we're done with this technology or that approach or this practice because we've had bad performance or bad history with that." Well, we want to change that. We want to expand the toolbox using credible information that's trusted as well. And it's already happening, to be honest with you. TAPE, which is the Washington-based field testing program, is the basis for crediting here in Minnesota. MPCA took leadership on that. So without a TAPE program or something like it, or STEP, which will take the place of STEP or TAPE in the future, means no crediting at all. And that's then we're losing those technologies and those options in our program. So as far as national marketplace and barriers to entry, we're really trying to, again, instead of making it jurisdiction by jurisdiction to get approvals done, to get technologies and new innovations used. Again, we're building upon these state programs. One's in Washington, one's in New Jersey. Leverage those and make this multi-state and hopefully national in the near future. And there's many states and jurisdictions that are supportive of this. EPA headquarters and regions have been supportive of this as well. So we feel like we're going to be able to set that up and get this national marketplace going very, very soon. And again, to lower the cost of and time for technologies to get to the sector is really important. If you've got a new innovative technology you want to get out into a broad way, right? You need to. It's right now. It's very hard. It takes 2 or 3 years to get through a lot of these testing programs, hundreds of thousands of dollars. That may still be the case, but if you've got a national marketplace, you can make a bigger upside on the commercial side for technologies. So we're trying to accelerate innovation by not only reducing those barriers to entry, but also kind of addressing that valley of death, which is I've always thought is a little bit dramatic. But we see a lot of R&D, a lot of research up front as technologies are developed, going left to right on that x-axis, and then as it gets closer to a going to market or going to implementation, industry gets really excited. But what happens in between? That's what that drop is, that valley of death, and that's where STEP is coming in to help provide that support, so things don't get lost at that level. And we know that things are going to change over time, and we're going to have to evolve. So we're not going to wait till things are perfect. We're going to help make sure that that's done correctly. So who's involved? Just so you know, who's supporting all of this. There's a lot of companies that you would think on the MTD side, but there's also some public sector folks too. Sanitation District Number 1, which is represents 30 plus MS4s. Of course, Cap Region and Luke has been involved, which is great. Since day one, we've got Department of Ecology out in Washington, of course, too. So what's the future for us? And for STEP, we've got a 3-phase plan. We're in the second phase, which is the transition phase. We're trying to finalize all the lab testing in this phase. We're going to move on to the field testing as well in our next phase and be fully operational at that point in by hopefully the mid to end of 2025 overall. And the big news is that we are projected to launch just in a couple months, April 1st, focusing first on trash capture technologies, that doesn't exist anywhere right now. So that's really exciting. So anyway, I wanted to just put another plug in here for ASTM, and again, the leadership that Andy's providing on this front. We need to get more and more folks involved. We've got our first standard has been finalized within a year and a half, something like that. It's record speed. Again, we're focusing on finishing lab testing the next 3 to 6 months, and then field testing is going to be our next area. It's going to take a year and a half, something like that. So I did want to put a quick plug in for the Centers of Excellence for Stormwater Infrastructure Technologies, or CSITs. This is something that has been in federal legislation since 2010 that has been talked about, and it finally became reality in terms of authorized and appropriated support at the budgetary level for Congress just this past, a couple years ago, and it's becoming a reality right now. There are universities going after this. I don't know how much I can share, but there are universities going after this right now. And it's not a whole lot of money right now, but it's just the start of the legacy. I think that these research institutions are going to make in addressing the next generation of technologies in stormwater. It's a really exciting time. STEP is hopefully going to be involved with this, really on the public domain side, but it could be something that just supports STEP overall long term as well. It's hard to look in the crystal ball too far, but anyway, this is a big deal. And things eventually come to pass. That's the thing I had to keep in mind after promoting or advocating for this for years and years and years. So anyway, bottom line, wrapping things up, does stormwater treatment performance matter? Yes, is the answer. Obviously, for where I'm coming from, I think it matters. And overall, what's the freaking point? So again, to make this as Minnesota as possible, I had to mention the hockey hair finalists from 2023. Those dudes take themselves seriously, and we should take ourselves seriously as well. I think it goes 1, 2, 3. So and that's coming up in a couple of weeks, and I went to Minnetonka, so we have to talk about hockey, right? Don't we have to do that? Anyway, we need to take ourselves seriously. If we do, then we will have higher expectations of ourselves. That's the takeaway. What we do does matter. It's mattering more and more. We're learning more with all this great research. We're learning more and more about the impacts of runoff. There's billions of dollars at stake. Billions of dollars being spent across the country annually on stormwater. Let's do it right. This is our time. Again, this is the water quality issue of our time. There's a lot beyond just the environmental benefits and issues, economic viability, public health. This is not minor stuff. And I know Randy Neprash didn't know who the person in the low right hand side was, and so I wanted to almost kick him out of the room for that. But that's Joe Mauer. He hits the right way. He's a Hall of Famer now, right? And I had to, I'm trying to pander to the crowd here as much as I can, obviously. But the point is, we're doing this anyway. I'm sorry?
Cheap shots at me will always.
Oh yeah, of course. Cheap shots at Randy always. People applaud that all day long. I'm with you. Anyway, so we're doing this anyway. Well, let's do it right. And Joe Mauer spent a lot of time doing it right, and he's being rewarded, and I think we will be too. So anyway, that's what I have. I know there's some questions, but I'll just I skip past that so that we can talk about that. So that's what I have. Hopefully, there's some thoughts that come out of this. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Seth. So what questions do we have for Seth? We'll take some questions from in person, and we'll take some from online. Don't be shy. All right, we'll take one right here.
Hi, Seth. I'm John Gulliver from the University of Minnesota. So when we talk about performance, there is some data out there, and that would be the International BMP database. And so my question is, how does STEP relate to the International BMP database? What do you think of it? Yeah, both of those questions.
Okay, so just to restate for those who may not have heard it, just in case, the question is the International BMP database and how STEP relates to, or is maybe potentially redundant with, or not, and how does it relate? Okay. So for those who are aware of this, it's been around for a long time, right? For 20 years, probably 25 years, something like that. It's been around for a couple decades, I think. And it's a place where there's research from researchers all over the country, maybe the world, about performance of different stormwater practices. And it's a great resource, and it has been a great resource, and I think it'll continue to be a great resource. The difference between that and STEP is that is a clearinghouse where any study that you do, you can put that information up there for people to learn from, right? But there's not a standardized protocol about how that was done. So it's hard to look at apples to apples. How does that compare to this? Because they may have been, if we look at two different technologies or studies, they may have been done consistently or may not. That's not really the focus of that. That's more about just let's have a place where all research goes, right? So STEP is more about applied research, getting this from academic institutions and research institutions to the ground. And so it's more about comparing technologies and making sure that they're done in a way that provide trust, and and it's been verified by a third party, which I don't think is the case for the data that has to be put up into the BMP database. So we do hope for this, the centers of excellence. I think they're going to that the BMP database hopefully is going to continue to be supported, because I think it's kind of it's hard to maintain a system like that for a long time. But hopefully it's going to be reinvigorated, and it's going to be related in some way. But I think the big difference again is that the lack of consistency on the protocols and how the research was done. Now, if that answers the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Let's take a question from online, and then we'll come back to our in-person audience.
All right. The national upside is challenges. Since different parts of the country would have a different climate and rain zone, this would affect how well STEP-approved technologies perform. How would national approval for technologies work if there is no guarantee a certificated MTD/BMP can meet the same performance across all climate zones?
So the question has to do with if there is different parts of the country have different climates and rain zones and whatnot, how that affects the approval of technologies and performance of technologies. It's a great point. That is something that we are looking at, and that's, Minnesota again leads the way on this, because Minnesota developed their crediting system based upon testing done in Washington State, which is a different type of environment, a different type of rainfall distributions, different types of even things like dissolved phosphorus partitioning, right? But there's a way to and we're looking into this right now, coming up with methodologies to transfer or transform performance in different contexts. So we're not completed with that by any stretch, but that's a major area of focus. When it comes in, some of the lab testing, how that's applied across the country, that's, I think, an easier, because it's a controlled environment, right? But field testing done in one location, how applicable is that in other locations? It's possible. There's been a lot of research looking at how pollutants differ across different geographies and climates and whatnot. We just need to come up with that official methodology to do so, and that is something that we're working on right now. So I don't know if does that answer all of that? I believe. I think that if I can just, as you're doing that, Andy, he said, how would the other question, or the second part of this question, how would national approval for technologies work if there's no guarantee certified BMP can meet the same performance? Okay, yeah, so it's the same type of thing. We're looking at how performance, yeah, we know that that's an issue, and we're trying to address that, and we will be addressing it.
Take another question from in person.
Thanks, Andy. I'm the aforementioned Randy Nieprash. So I've had the privilege of working with MS4 cities for a long time and seen the good work that they are doing and the good work that the cities are requiring that developers and builders and other folks are doing as well. So there should be a very powerful story to be told about the breadth of that good work and the amount of water quality protection and improvement that's been the result of that good work. It seems as though there have been that story isn't told, and the data to tell that story isn't really collected or aggregated. There are two missing pieces. One is despite the fact that we have a BMP-based permit, nobody actually counts or tracks.
Just to clarify, we in Minnesota, just to clarify.
No,
For
no,
those-
nationally, the whole MS4 program in general is a
Okay.
BMP-based permitting program, and yet nobody counts or tracks the number of BMPs that are
Oh, right.
built
I
and installed, either statewide here or nationally. But then the other piece that's missing is what's the actual result of each of those BMPs, which is linked. That's the performance that you're talking about. So STEP seems like an important piece in beginning to flesh out that story and build the capacity to tell that story to Congress, to the American public, et cetera, et cetera. So can you talk a bit about how STEP could and should function in that capacity? Because it seems like an important step in that direction.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I appreciate that, Randy. You're right. The data. One of the challenges in getting stormwater to be included in the ASCE infrastructure report card was just the lack of data, right? And asset management is part of that. That's mature in many other sectors. I don't know about all of the sectors, but many others, especially in the water sector, right? So we need to get more data on, and like you said, we can only speculate on the number of BMPs that are out there, or SCMs, or what the right term is, whatever, stormwater infrastructure, right, facilities, whatever. It's in the millions, question mark. We don't know, that's we're data poor, and that needs to be, I agree with you. And that's part of that is what we've been looking at, and it's not as mature as the STEP program, is standards for GIS, for instance, and how do we collect stormwater infrastructure data and assets. If we can standardize that more, then we can more readily roll that up. I think about the National Bridge Inventory, right? That's something that's mature. It's been around for a long time. There's even problems with that data, but it's a lot better than what we have in the stormwater sector. You're right. So we need to do that. So that's another, I think, reason that a national organization has value. And then in terms of performance, you're talking about performance related to all this that's put in. Again, we don't even know how many, let alone. So I agree. If we can get a better understanding of the performance of the major groups and categories of SCMs and RBMPs, we'll have more confidence overall, and we'll be able to tell that story, to your point. And we can answer the question: are things getting better? Are things not getting better? Is it worth it or not? And that's at the end of the day. You can't make the statement that it's worth putting this in for public health, environment, whatever. If it's not functioning or we can't prove that it is, it's really hard to make the case that major investments should be made. I agree with that. So again, Minnesota, I think, is taking charge. I think the way that you have your spreadsheets and the number of BPs, that I can't remember what that's called, but that accounting that's done here is different and I think advanced, and it sets up the need for something like STEP to plug in and say, yeah, we don't, right now we're just kind of guessing. We've got some research, but have we looked at it in the ground, and have we followed up on that? So anyway, I agree that we could tell a better story if we had better data, and hopefully STEP could be part of that story. Yeah.
Let's take another question from online.
This question says, Seth, with all of your work, are there any considerations for maintenance and BMP depreciation?
So the question is about operations and maintenance, right? And right. Yeah, so that's a good point. That's in our plan. That's not part of what we're doing right now. We do, obviously, you put something in the ground or you install it. Day one, we have some kind of idea of performance, but year 5 might be something different, especially different levels of maintenance that have been done. But this is going. There's a facility out in Oregon that looks at is looking at ways to do artificial aging, right? Kind of running runoff through in an accelerated fashion to see if we can, and not have to wait 5 years to understand what that performance decay is, as an example. So there is that research going on across the country, and we want to, again, a benefit of a national effort is that we can find out what's going on across the country, these different research facilities and efforts, and we can bring them to the national level and leverage that. But so the answer is, right now, that's not part of what we're looking at, but we know that we do have to include that in the future.
Other in-person.
Hi, Paula Kalinowski from MPCA. And first, I just have a comment. You made a comment that stormwater infrastructure is always like number 200 and something on the list. And
I think 252, that's my
okay.
number.
And I'm thinking everybody in this room had this reaction. What?
Yeah.
Because I know for me, my engineering career has always involved stormwater and surface water. But I think it goes back in some sense to that graph that you put up with the Clean Water Act, and 85% of the sources were point sources, and
Yep.
then we had non-point, and now it's flipped.
Yep.
And I know when I was doing my graduate thesis, I was always thinking one of the outcomes of the MS4 program was that it kind of highlighted or showcased the actual pollution that's in stormwater runoff, now that it's separate from sanitary sewer. But
Yep.
I think there's a legacy there, and people, a lot of the MS4's enthusiasm and their willingness to be aggressive in stormwater management depends a lot on the leadership, right, within the city. And some people come from different backgrounds. And I guess what I'm getting at here is do you have resources to help advance this message? Because in my mind, almost any infrastructure project is a stormwater opportunity. Most infrastructure projects, I know there's some infrastructure that doesn't get directly rained on, but is a stormwater management opportunity. And stormwater management is always this secondary thought. And I think we just need to, bring to the fore that it's always part of an infrastructure it's not every infrastructure project, but
many.
So many. So do you have resources for, going to the leadership in the state, at the city level, et cetera, and promoting the need?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have some. I think we need a lot more, frankly. And I couldn't agree, obviously, more with what you're saying. That let me clarify. I'm sorry. You said you were surprised that it's so far down on the list. In my mind, is that what you were saying? I just want to clarify. Okay, that's interesting. I feel like, yeah. No, I get you. No, I get you. No, I think we do have some resources. We need to get a lot more and develop a lot of those. It's where do you start is the question. It's because of the legacy of, how immature or informal our sector is compared to others. We're just behind, and it's something that we can't turn this ship around tomorrow, but we can start to turn it. But I think a lot of what we're trying to do at the national level is provide that, greater awareness overall. And I'll just say this, and Randy, I don't know if I could ask you to comment on this too, since you've been involved in the national level. It's just amazing how little awareness and understanding there is in federal agencies as well as in Congress. So, like, if we can change provide awareness there, that's what we can do. And then provide resources at the local level to say, basically, this stuff matters, and we're trying to provide the information, data, to your point. Yeah, this does matter, and here's why, and here's what you can do about it, and it doesn't have to cost X, Y, Z, or if it does, there are ways to find that money. But anyway, that's our goal. What you've just stated is our goal, and we do have some of those resources. We want to develop more of those resources over time. So, and we need to hear from entities, state regulators, MS4s, researchers, others. What is that? What should that information be? What's most effective? It's not an easy question to answer, but the more the questions that we ask, the more information we get, the better we can get about it or be about it. So anyway.
Let's take another question online.
Larry had, oh, sorry.
Yeah, we'll go to Larry right after online.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Okay, this question says, will STEP include a design and installation protocol for tested BMPs to ensure the BMP works as designed and tested? Many state SWM manuals are not that prescriptive for field design, and/or designers sometimes like to introduce improvements that might not always work. Either situation could invalidate the control testing results.
Yeah, so the question is about, as I see it, and here is, thank you, is that there's something, let's say I've got this widget and I'm going to test this. Well, who's to say that this widget is sent to the site? Is it the same? Like if a plan set said, hey, we're going to use that widget because it's been tested, we're confident in that. Well, this widget is made somewhere else or fabricated or whatever on the MTD side. So what shows up may not be the same. You know, you may say we tested this, but what ends up being installed is that, right? Something totally different, or something that's critically different. So you're not going to get the same performance. And there's that, and there's also just in the installation process, things can be tweaked, right? One thing that we are looking at doing, we don't have this set up yet, is what's called an auditing process. So that it's funny. I was at a baseball practice for my son recently, and it was they're finishing the baseball field, and there was all this construction equipment around, and there was one of these MTDs out there, and it had a big covering over it. I didn't know what was behind it. It could have been a piano. I don't know, but it was. They said it was, it was from company X, and it was this type of device. Okay, I'll take them at their word. What we would like to do in the future is to be able to have a step logo that says somebody looked at this and made sure that what was tested is actually what's being delivered to the site. And that's something that's done in a lot of other industries. And that's a service that I think would kind of complete the circle of making sure performance is being delivered in the ground and in the field. So it's going to take some time to do that, but I think hopefully that addresses that. And as far as construction oversight and management, there's only so much that we can make sure of that. And I do know that that's an issue. We can look at that in the future, but at the very least, making sure that what has been tested is actually in the ground is something that we want to provide. We don't have that capability right now, but we want to provide that in the future.
Our question first. You're talking about mostly proprietary devices, things that are built and installed.
Yeah, I can answer that, but go ahead.
Well, why don't you answer that?
Okay, I'll answer that. Okay, and Larry Baker, right? Okay. So we're starting with, so there's two P's in here, not just to be clever or to be misspelling easy words, but because it's products and practices. And so and I didn't get into that here, but the fundamental principle of the STEP program is that we need to care about performance of all of our infrastructure, whether it's public domain ponds, bioretention facilities that are constructed, or whether it's something that you buy off a shelf, or so, or a widget or whatever. We're starting with the MTDs, those that are proprietary, because that's the clearest demand, and it's just a more mature framework. We do want to work with SAFL and others across the country, so we can understand how can we develop testing methods so that we can look over time about how the ponds perform. And we could look at different constituents, for instance. But the short answer is we want to look at both. We're starting with MTDs and proprietary products because there's this low-hanging fruit for us. But we definitely want to go to the public domain side. And there's precedent for that in the field testing program in Washington, the TAPE program. They have started going down this road. So we want to build upon that.
I would, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but there's a somewhat bigger picture of that in terms of actually getting, improving water quality downstream. One is we've done very little work on source reduction, especially for nutrients and such. And there seems to be, especially with the new way, the GIS, we can do things on a square foot level now, where we could do it on a multi-acre level 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Yep.
And that enables a lot of work. One example we have of that is not 100% correct or assured or whatever, but it does appear that our phosphorus fertilizer law passed in 2003, it appears that has resulted in reduced phosphorus concentrations, but that never gets credited anywhere. And we really need to develop. We're not going to be able to install devices to stop all stormwater pollution.
Absolutely agree.
We've got to put at least an equal effort upstream to make sure that happens. And the other is downstream, we have lots of collectors called lakes. And if a lake goes from being impaired to being unimpaired, well, who cares how well the stormwater works? When we were doing our street sweeping study a couple of years ago, somebody asked, well, how do we get credit for this? I said, well, if you have a lake in your city that's impaired, badly impaired, and it's a valuable lake to you, just clean it up and the hell with the regulators. Once you're cleaning it up, you're not impaired. They can't say you have to have a TMDL. So that's an extreme position, but we really need to think about what we're trying to achieve here, especially here in Minnesota, where we have these receptors that are also very valuable to us. half
Lakes?
the people, lakes in the urban area, half the people living in cities. I'm sorry, half of the urbanized lakes with at least part of the shoreline in an urban area. Half of the people live within a mile of an urbanized lake. So these are very, very important. And we need to think broader than just devices. It's certainly an important part, especially for new infrastructure and things like that, and in highly built up areas. But we need to think both upstream and downstream in terms of exactly, what we're trying to accomplish.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's why I know it's an overused term, but it's all of the above. And I'm not trying to be defensive about any of this. I couldn't, I mean, on the products and practices, I wasn't trying to be defensive there. I'm just saying that's our pathway moving forward. And as far as think about source control versus downstream treatment, I mean, the hardest thing to do is to get pollution out. The easiest thing or most cost-effective thing is not to have it happen in the first place, right? So and that's why NMSA at the larger level, we support, and what we're referring to as true source control is one of the fundamental things that we focus on, as much green chemistry or whatever you want to call it. So, but there is a clear need to do treatment, and so if we can provide more, and like Randy said, tell a better story, and we hope that step, maybe along with things like the International BMP database and others, can collect that data, provides that form where we can collect that data and better tell that story, so that we can be more effective when we do that. Because you're talking about, we can just clean that lake up. Well, okay, that's true. Where does that money come from, and who pays for that, and who needs to be convinced to spend that money? I think there's a story that needs to be told. Someone, decision makers have to agree that it's worth it. Well, I think someone would have to say, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And how much is it going to cost? And is it going to work or not? Those are the kind of questions we're going to answer. But anyway, that's just one part of the larger story. Totally agree. And street sweeping, all the work that you've done, I think is a big part of that too.
Well, very good. We are out of time for our keynote presentation, so we're going to take a quick break and transition to our panel discussion. Please join us again in 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Welcome back to the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. Again, my name is Andy Erickson. I will be serving as the moderator for our panel discussion. To start our panel discussion, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and I will ask for their relation to our topic today. And then we'll dive into your questions and some of my questions that I have for the panel. So if you're online, please enter your questions in the Q&A. If you're here in person, have your questions ready. But to start, let's introduce our panelists. Our first panelist, I'm going to start on my right, your left, at the far side, with Luke Martinkosky, who is Water Resources Regulatory Specialist at Capital Region Watershed District. So Luke, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to today's topic?
Well, just from my job title, you imagine that I relate to everything from a regulatory perspective. We're a highly urbanized watershed district, and space is at a premium. These projects and these practices cost a lot of money to put in. So we just want to understand how we can incentivize the construction of the most effective practices. So I was part of a team as MTDs started to become more high demand and want to be used more to analyze the data that was available, particularly around the removal of phosphorus, which is what we focus on in the Watershed District primarily, to see how we could incorporate that into our rules and ensure that we are still getting the pollutant removals that we expect. And so that was a lot of data crunching from the TAPE program, which Seth mentioned earlier, as well as working with the PCA.
Very good. Thank you, Luke. Our next panelist is Liz Stout. And Liz's title is the Water Resources Manager at the City of Minneapolis Public Works. So Liz, from your perspective and experience, how do you relate to today's topic?
Well, Minneapolis is the city of lakes. We have 13 lakes, 4 creeks, and a significant part of the Mississippi River running through this. I think everyone in the room, our main goal is water quality. and how we get there. And there are so many competing resources, even within the city of Minneapolis's stormwater world. We have a stormwater utility, but those resources are being competing between new BMPs, operation and maintenance. We do flood control. We do street sweeping. We have to replace all of our assets. We have, I looked it up, we have over 500 miles of storm sewer pipe that need to be replaced at any one time. So there are a lot of different competing interests for all of the funding within the city of Minneapolis, even within stormwater. And so knowing where to put the best BMP in the best place will help us kind of better use our resources, our limited resources, while still protecting water quality. We have swimmable lakes in Minneapolis within sight of downtown. I think we need to realize how unique that is and what kind of resources we have to protect.
Very good. Thank you, Liz. And thank you for returning as a panelist in our Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. Our next panelist, Todd Shoemaker, is also a returning panelist for our stormwater. So thanks again for being here. Todd is a principal and senior water resources engineer at Stante. So Todd, from your experience and perspective, how do you relate to today's topic?
Morning. Thanks for having me. I'm thinking about this, thinking in terms of maybe 3 different hats that I wear or others similar at Stantec wear. And that's kind of the number one is on the design engineer side as a designer, understanding what we're designing and what is the expected performance. The other side is as a watershed engineer, or similar to Luke as the regulator, is as we're evaluating others' designs, does it meet the standard? Does it meet the guidance that the stormwater manual or others that have laid out for that particular practice? And then the last one, I think, is more so on an education or a guidance, a communication sort of hat, is I think we all have some, especially in the audience and online, we have some responsibility for supervision of leading others. It's very easy to want to do something bigger, better, faster. So I'm going to pick this MTD and it's going to get me 68% removal. So I think the education, the guidance part is, where did that 68% come from? What understanding how that methodology may apply to your specific site or situation or not apply.
That's great. And I want to thank our panelists because what we try to do with our Stormwater Seminar Series is bring a diversity of perspectives. So I'm glad you talked about the hats that you're wearing, and hopefully you can see why we invite the folks that we invite. Now, I won't ask for Seth's perspective because he gave us our keynote topic and set the stage, but I'm going to start with an opening question, and I want you to have your questions ready when this one's done. So the opening question is, I want you each, if possible, to give me a little insights into how stormwater BMP performance plays a role in your organization or in some of those hats that you wear. Where does that play a role for you, and how do you use that information? Anyone can start.
You've heard my stuff, so.
Not it.
All right, I'll jump in. It's getting me to shut up, that's the problem. So with the city of Minneapolis, as Todd mentioned, there are a few different hats that we wear. First of all is a regulatory hat. We are a regulated MS4, so we do have to deal with, permit compliance and really dealing with TMDLs, impaired waters, making sure that we're meeting some of those reduction standards. On the other hand of being a regulator is for new development. When new development comes in, or redevelopment in the case of Minneapolis, we need to make sure that they're appropriately treating their stormwater so that we're seeing improvements in our water resources so that we're not degrading them. We also recently, in 2022, started regulating ourselves. We had an exemption for linear projects, road reconstructions, and we removed that exemption. So we now are kind of regulating ourselves internally, or at least our transportation groups. So let me see here. I took notes. So we do have different water quality standards based on the receiving water. So the treatment needed going into Minneapolis is far different than the treatment needed to go into the Mississippi River. So really understanding how the BMP performance really helps us then from that regulatory end. Another part of performance is installation, it's operation and maintenance. My part of public works is we can oversee, we have inspectors for installation, but then we also then own and operate all of these BMPs that are put in on the public sector. So how are they being operated? Are they being operated efficiently and effectively to continue to provide all of that water quality protection?
I would say that BMP effectiveness guides 90 to 99% of our decision making as a watershed district. So it's absolutely critical. We have a lot of overlapping needs to what Liz just described. So I'll just talk a little bit about the rulemaking process and how BMP effectiveness carries into that. So we're looking to treat just as much stormwater runoff as we possibly can. And our rules are based around volume reduction. So we can expect if we infiltrate stormwater, then we're getting essentially 100% pollutant reduction to our receiving waters, which are primarily the Mississippi River. And we look at that through that frame. We start with infiltration as the #1 most effective BMP that we want to focus on. And then we start to move down the list, maybe an iron enhanced sand filter, and then a sand filtration as far as what we think is the most effective based on the data. And then MTDs have come into play and are being used a lot more in urban environments. And those are filtration systems. They don't retain any of the water. It all goes to the receiving water. So how much volume do each of these MTDs need to filter for us to get the same pollutant reduction that we would expect from a different or more effective BMP? And so that's where we need to go back to that data and look, and what's the source of it? What's the partitioning of the particulate phosphorus and the dissolved phosphorus? How does that compare to the runoff that we have in our watershed district? And then take that information and help our developers, the regulated community, choose the best BMP for their project, for that location. So I think that's how it relates to rulemaking for me.
Yeah, for me, the kind of the planning decision-making question, I think of sub-watershed assessments, if that's for a city or watershed, in terms of a menu. When we're doing these assessments, we are looking at the menu of practices and what can and can't apply in certain locations, all with the frame or the goal of getting to some reduction. You add up all these possible menu choices to get to some reduction. We want the total to be what we expect. You know, I was in a restaurant last week and the total came to $120, and I'm doing mental math, and it should have been 60, 80. Like, hey, when we get to the end of implementing our sub-watershed assessment and practices, we want that total to kind of rationalize where we started.
Oh, you've heard my stuff, so yeah.
That's all right. All right, well, let's dive into some questions. We'll just start right here in the front of the room, and then we'll go online.
Thanks for being here. This is really great. I guess my question is about if performance testing or specifications stifle innovation, in that if a new thing comes along and maybe the test or the specification doesn't exactly fit it right, does that limit the implementation of something new?
Anyone can start.
I'll just touch on it. Seth had a nice slide about the Valley of Death. And so the Valley of Death kind of occurs after the innovation phase. And that's where STEP would step in. So I think the innovation that you're thinking of is kind of upstream of that. And once these new ideas, these new practices have had kind of a proof of concept and some bench testing, then there's an opportunity to move it into this type of framework. So I don't think it would stifle the upstream innovation. It would just make it more critical to determine how we could test it consistently with other existing practices.
Yeah, I mean, I've never heard someone talk about the Valley of Death as being a nice slide, so I appreciate that. I never put on my mic. Oh, that's probably better. Anyway. Okay, it's done? Okay. Well, they don't need to hear my Valley of Death comment anyway. No, but I do appreciate what you're saying, Luke. And I think one of the things that for the STEP program, we are focused on ASTM standards because oftentimes, I mean, I think this is, I can't remember what the stat better than I do, but I think it's some majority, 75, 80% of standards within ASTM started somewhere else. So it's more of a, that's going to, those don't come out of nowhere and they take a while. So we're basing our technical, reviews and verifications on pretty well proven, testing standards. That comes from someplace that's mature, So to your point about what if something comes out of left field, right? We don't have a standard for that. Well, that is something that we do have to address. The hope is, and what I'd like to do is find some way to provide support for smaller, startups or whatever, so that they can develop those testing standards as part of the STEP program, so that by the time this could be part of their R&D, they've done some testing work. Maybe we can use whatever they're doing and bring it into ASTM to formalize it, and then that way we can kind of capture these emerging technologies in a formalized way without STEP and without ASTM and the leadership of ASTM. They might be just floating around in a non-standardized way. So we hope that STEP and the associated programs can capture these innovations and give a pathway. So if I'm of a new technology, one of the questions would be, where do I get funding? Someone's got to have to, provide funding to grow this technology and whatnot. If there's a proven pathway, there could be more incentive to provide that funding that's needed. It's less of a risk, right? Here's a proven way to go from A to B when it comes to, just someone's basement to, somewhere closer to the market. So we hope to capture that innovation by just existing that way and providing a pathway. So, but there is a challenge and looking at performance too strictly, that could stifle innovation, but we hope to try to provide that pathway. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but.
Any other thoughts? I'll add on to that I don't think a practice would be stifled. Let's say it's in a regulatory or a site design sort of context. I think it would need to be part of a larger discussion in terms of how does the design, how does the treatment mechanism that's in that, how does that relate to proven or accepted technologies? And then maybe there's some additional conversation on there about maintenance, that maybe there isn't a standard maintenance template for that device, that practice. There needs to be added evaluation, more frequent site visits.
And one would hope that as BMPs make their way into, installation within the city, they have a really proven track record, understanding the need for constant evolution and innovation. But once again, it comes down to, are we being the best stewards of our tax dollars, of our stormwater utility funding? And Todd touched on it briefly. It's maintenance. We just in 2022, we installed over 200 on city projects BMPs. So maintenance is an ongoing challenge. How do we standardize that? How do we use the same equipment? Things like that are probably a bigger challenge to us providing innovative best practices than any type of a standard.
I'll just add, Seth mentioned ASTM and talked about ASTM a little bit. Two things from that. One, there are examples where new concepts, new challenges, new technologies have come through, and we're developing new standards in response to that. One example is microplastics. So that's a specific area where ASTM has been in the market and is continuing to grow and develop standards in response to those issues. But the key, and this is the second part of my comment, is we need people that are innovative and forward-thinking and responsive to these challenges. Because, I can't be an expert in everything, and none of us can, but what we are an experts of, we can contribute to that part of the industry. So when new technologies come up, and we have expertise there, you might get drawn into some of these initiatives and efforts to respond and make stormwater better overall. So let's see, we took an in-person question, let's take an online question, and then we'll go back to in-person.
Okay, this question asks, what are your ideas on how can we, meaning universities and the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council, enhance our ongoing research to further the science and evidence to support BMP performance?
So the question was, how can the research community support BMP performance? Excuse me. I think back to Seth's earlier presentation and a comment or question about maintenance. And I think your comment was, I think we know we have a good idea of how something performs day one. How does something perform day 5 or year 5, year 10? And that then informs Liz's challenge of how to schedule and pay for maintenance in the city of Minneapolis or elsewhere.
I think that's the nail on the head. Maintenance is a huge challenge that we're all aware of, and more information on that would be really, really helpful.
I think the other missing component is when BMPs are used to failure, especially proprietary BMPs. What does that failure look like? What does the replacement look like? Is it a component replacement? Is it having to go in and replace an entire, 12-foot diameter manhole? What does that look like? I think that's a kind of a gap that we have now, especially with proprietary devices, and understanding that total lifespan and then what that replacement ultimately looks like.
I guess it sounds to me like, and I agree with everybody that's been said, especially on the maintenance side. To me, I frame this under like asset management. Would that be true of like, a lot of this comes into looking at performance to support an asset management plan. And I think that in advanced programs like Minneapolis, there's an asset management plan that's pretty well developed. In a lot of other jurisdictions, that's not the case. So if we can help to provide information, like not only day 1, but also year 5 on what's that performance decay, or here's the type of maintenance that's needed to maintain a certain level of performance. And if there's a way to tie that to crediting, so there's an incentive to make sure that maintenance is provided, then I think that then we can help to support asset management as a field within stormwater, which is needed significantly. So I appreciate all the focus on O&M. I agree with that.
Well, let's take another question from in person.
Question. If you've talked about a lot of the problems with BMPs, but if you had to look upstream, what would be the most important thing for you regarding source reduction to help both with respect to the the way you operate BMPs downstream, but also with respect to your receiving waters in that area? Is there a particular pollutant or source of pollutant or such?
Take a stab, I guess, first. And maybe it's too easy, too obvious of an answer. But it comes back to housekeeping, and which then gets to education for me in terms of outreach and education to homeowners, business owners. You think of yard waste, chloride, those type of pollutants, and I think everybody in the audience here realize we know the problem, we know solutions, so we got to work with our stakeholders to get that, to do the education and the outreach.
Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned chloride. I think a big part of that is education and public expectation for how those are being used. At the end of the day, it's taken us over 100 years to get here, and it's taken individual actions by individual people to kind of create some of this pollution. I think it's going to take the exact same thing to change it. It is individual actions. I think it's also empowering people. If you have a business that is putting down a lot of salt, for example, the city can have a regulatory component, but if they're hearing from neighbors in their neighborhood, from people again and again and again, they may more likely change their practices. So I think empowering people, educating people to want to protect stormwater, both at their own property, but also to empower them to reach out and try to influence the behavior and make behavior change in others.
I think about source reduction in a kind of a cross-profession way. We are really focused on infrastructure and stormwater here, but urban planning is really critical. I think all the time about the width of roads and urban sprawl and how we might be able to reduce that. Like, so this is more of like a watershed wide or metro wide issue. How can we design our urban, suburban, exurban areas to be less connected to our water bodies with impervious surfaces? And that's an impervious surface reduction. It's maybe changes in design, but then also really changes in planning. And that's largely coordinating with people that are kind of outside of our daily work.
From a national perspective, I guess that's where I'm going to look at this. I think characterization and research is really helpful, and an example of that is looking at the TAPE program, right, and how that could be transferred in, and for crediting in Minnesota. One of the big differences is dissolved phosphorus and particulate bound phosphorus, and it's interesting. That's interesting that there's a significant difference. We have to account for that. But from a national perspective, the question is, well, what is that? What's the basis of that? Is it deciduous trees, versus coniferous trees and whatever? What's the source of this difference? And therefore, can we extrapolate from that to North Carolina and maybe how their phosphorus loading related to a deciduous tree fall, and that can lead to a policy, right, that can also support a technology. So street sweeping, can that be done in a practice that can reduce phosphorus loading in a certain way? So I think just to me, characterization and research. I know I'm pandering here since it's a research facility, but I do think that can help us at the national level to have a greater understanding of the lessons learned in one location. Can we generalize that or expand that out for a broader benefit?
Luke, I'll just add, I loved your comment on the urban planning side of it, and totally over my skis here in terms of parking lot design, but that made me think of that and how the retail landscape has changed recently. How are we keeping up? Are we keeping up with that in terms of parking lot design and space and capacity and all that? So that's just an interesting overlap or area of effort for us, perhaps. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to reemphasize too. I think, often we think about pollutants, and that was kind of the question, is the example of pollutants, but thinking about how those are transported through our urban landscapes and maybe rethinking that is another effort we should equally be thinking about. So let's take another question online, and then we'll come back to the in-person group.
All right. Do you have any thoughts to share about technologies converting passive infrastructure to active or adaptive controls like smart ponds? It seems like these have a huge potential, but are Complex to model and estimate credits for.
I think that, kind of the example given is using smart controls on ponds, pumping them down potentially ahead of rainstorms, providing additional flood capacity there. I think that has a lot of promise, especially when looking at like multiple benefits. Providing that additional flood control capacity within and also providing additional water quality capacity. I think there's a lot of benefits there. I think making sure that we're understanding some of the interplay, however, it's, if you're sending additional water downstream into a fully connected system, what does that do with, some of our maybe downstream flooding? And just making sure that we're thinking through some of those maybe unintended consequences of having those actively managed systems, and making sure we're not just looking at the location of the BMP or the actively managed pond, but making sure that the downstream impacts are taken into account. But I think they have a lot of promise. I think that's something that's really worth looking into.
I think it's a really good point too about looking at not just the site. I think about the University of Michigan and Bronco Kirk has looked at automating or optimizing. I don't remember the right term. Yeah, a little bit of both, of a watershed, right? Multiple controls for holistic performance overall. And I think real-time control facilities can help to make that happen. And so, I mean, it's more expensive, but if we do it the right way and optimize, maybe not everything, but there could be critical components within a watershed that, hey, if you optimize this, that can have significant benefits overall, or in a greater way. So I think that's the kind of thing that we need to do in the next generation of stormwater. And it's a good reminder for the STEP program to not think about, it's not just this facility, right? It's how does this fit into a larger context? So I think it can help performance of this facility, but how does that, like you said, fit into the larger watershed context? Because at the end of the day, that's what really we have to look at.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good idea.
Capital Region operates, I don't know, maybe half a dozen of these type of automated systems, and it helps us take advantage of our limited space by kind of double using practices. So we can draw them down and get treatment for what's there, and then have space for the next storm. So I think they're wonderful, but at the same time, they're not as smart as we might like. They require a lot of management and expertise on the part of people that are not me. So there's a lot of questions about, is this getting the treatment that we're expecting? What is the problem? How do we get a vendor in to work on this and fix this issue and investigate it? So it's much more, it takes a lot more person power to make these systems work than a passive system. So it's not right for everyone, but I think as the next generation of people come online and join the industry, they'll have more expertise that they can start applying for these systems. So I expect more of them in the next decade for sure.
Just a small thing to add on to totally agree with all the other comments here, but that these sort of systems can help solve other problems. Like I think of irrigation, that I think some of those projects in Cap Region and other stormwater ponds are irrigating our lawns and golf courses. Now the economics aren't there, or it takes a while for the economics, but it's part of the toolbox that shows promise.
Well, I'm actually going to take, we'll come back to in person, but I want to take a question here that we have prepared. And this question is, are things getting better or worse? And how might we know? So oftentimes we'll use our BMP performance information to give us a gauge of how we're doing, right? And how we select our BMPs. But those are often very much at a site scale. So thinking about watersheds, thinking about lakes, do we know if we're getting better, and how would you determine that?
I think I just saw this week on LinkedIn that Fish Lake and Maple Grove is going to be delisted. So
There you go.
There it is. All right.
It's a celebration.
Yeah.
One down. right?
Starts with one.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
I would just go back to long-term monitoring of our water bodies, rather than on a BMP specific scale for that particular issue. The PCA has put together, in conjunction with their partners, a lot of good information about the trends of the major pollutants leaving our state on the Mississippi River. Very promising for total phosphorus, which I think we've talked about with the fertilizer, as well as the hard work that a lot of people here in this room have been doing in urban environments, but then some other trends that are less promising, like nitrogen. And looking at that data helps us circle back and see where we need to refocus and look. And it's not just at the BMP level, but also at the source reduction level, and at a more holistic level. And to kind of get to Seth's point, does that mean we need to bring more technologies online for a specific pollutant, like copper out west or nitrogen here in the Mississippi River?
Minneapolis hasn't had any lakes delisted. Sad about that. However, we do have a really comprehensive monitoring program. I think that goes back to what Luke said, is we just need to keep on top of understanding what those pollutant trends are, trying to tie that maybe in Minneapolis back to, changes in our regulatory environment. Are we seeing changes with, now having to regulate our linear projects now when we do a road reconstruction? Is that going to have a difference in our water quality? It's slow progress over time. What we're seeing is we aren't seeing any big swings in our lake water quality, good or bad. It's kind of holding steady. So when saying, is it getting better or worse? It's kind of staying the same. That's a hard story to tell, though. It would be better if we're seeing some big swings, if we were seeing some massive improvements, especially with all of the investment we've been putting into BMPs, to street sweeping, to all of these practices we've been putting in. It's a harder story to tell that we're not getting worse.
Well, that was my question. So it's a little bit of a loaded question, but I think it's almost like the best of times and the worst of times, right? There are examples where things are getting better. There are examples of things being static, but I think compare that to what would otherwise have been. So there's an improvement based upon what the baseline would be. So I just think that, we're also finding out again, I'm going to pander the researcher here, but it's true. There's so much research that's being done that we're finding more challenges and more issues with microplastics and toxicity of 6-PPD and all that stuff. So at least we're looking, you know what I mean? And I feel like by not getting worse, we are getting better in many ways. But to go back to the previous conversation that we had, we need better data overall to be able to be more definitive in saying, yes, we are getting better, and this is why and how, and answer that question more definitively, and hopefully we can do that in the future.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate a couple things. So obviously the stormwater challenge is dynamic, and it's changing and it's growing. Every time we do measurements, we find new pollutants that we have to deal with. So that's a challenge. We have a moving target that's ever expanding. We're learning things that we didn't know. Right. So now we know that we don't know about that, and we have to do research. But I want to re-highlight. Yeah, I want to highlight something that Liz said earlier about managing expectations and thinking about legacy. It's taken us over 100 years to get us to our lakes where they are today, and our water resources, even our groundwater, right? How long should we really expect it to take before we get back to what we want in our targets? Is that going to be overnight? Likely not. So I think managing not only expectations within our organizations and within our stormwater teams, but then communicating that back to the public and decision makers, policymakers as well, because obviously those things can change very quickly. So I just wanted to re-highlight that, because that's always something we have to keep in mind. It's like we shouldn't get disheartened by keeping status quo and not getting worse, but maybe that's the bell of the curve going back the other direction.
Yeah, I think there's clearly a tension between short-term political views, let's say, for lack of a better term, and long-term science that says, hey, it's this, in a 4-year term, you can't make this, you can't make this, hey, we invested here. And you could throw into this mixed climate change, right? And so it's one thing to say, yeah, things are better than they were, or they're not as bad as they were, so we've improved. Well, now, like you said, it's gonna be more challenging potentially in many ways in the future. How are we going to address that? So by trying to keep it steady, maybe that is improved again over what it would have otherwise been. So it's challenging. You're right, but it does take decades and decades to see these improvements.
And I was going to say it depends on your lens. This is something, 1926, the USGS Fish Survey found 2 fish in the Mississippi River between St. Anthony Falls and Red Wing. Two fish. So I think it's worth remembering. I know that's 100 years ago, but look at what the river is now. I mean, that's also a big success. Maybe not necessarily due to, our work as, the stormwater community. It's more industrial pollutants, things like that, separating CSOs, separated sanitary and stormwater systems, infrastructure like that. But it depends on your lens and what you're looking at as success.
Yep.
And I'll just add for us in Minnesota, thinking about initiatives like the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment that are more long-term investments in trying to get to better water resources. These kind of questions and these kind of conversations about where do we find our successes, where do we find our wins, how do we demonstrate the wins of some of these investments is going to be important for us to highlight to try to propagate that and continue that into the future. So that's something for all of us to work on. I'm going to take a question here.
Thanks. It's tough to get my hand up before Randy here, but I have two questions, or one question, I guess, related to public domain practices. And if STEP actually is able to get into that standardized testing for public domain practices, that would be great. I have 2 issues, though, that potentially come to mind. First is, how do you standardize testing for public domain practices when there are so many potential designs for bioretention, for example? And then the second issue is, well, if you're successful in doing that, some of these removal efficiency numbers that we've got have been so hardwired into our manuals and rules and permits. How do we go about changing that? And how does if STEP's able to do this, how does that communicate that information to the people who have to translate that into certification?
Yeah. Okay. On the public domain side, you're right. I mean, how do you bioretention? There's all sorts of different permutations for bioretention design, right? Whether it's the filter media or whatever. One thing that the STM committee is set up in a way that we have one that's specifically on components. It's called components, isn't it? I should know that more definitively. But yeah, so the point is we can deconstruct public domain practices and look at the performance of critical aspects of almost like unit processes or operations or something like that. And then that's one way of stratifying performance. And it's also, if you think about filter media as an example, yeah, there's a lot of different mixes, but I think over time, and again, the researchers would know more about this than I would, but there's been a wide variety, and I don't have any definitive proof of that. This is something we'd have to look at. I think there's probably a finite number of kind of generalized mixes of filter media. I know some are proprietary. I get that too, but I think we can come up with some way of categorizing or generalizing specific, like common filter media mixes and whatnot, and then just look at ways to test those out and look at practices or testing of performance of filter media, and then the larger context too. So I mean, we don't know yet. It has to be developed. That's why this, MTDs are much more straightforward, because it's like, here's this component, water goes in, water goes out. We can look at it that way, right? It's a little bit different when something's constructed, but I think there's a way to do this, and I just think it's going to look a little bit differently. And then the other question was about how does so if there's 60% phosphorus removal, associated with practice X, Y, or Z, and that's written down. Once you write something down, there's regulators in the room, right, that understand once you do that, or then it's like, that's the Bible. That's it, right? And so how do you walk that back, or how do you edit that or change that, right? And I feel like it's a hard thing to do anyway. Once something's written down, you know, how do you change that? Well, I think the best way to justify any change, especially backwards, would be, or a reduction in crediting, is based upon data, verified data that is collected at least as robustly as possible, you know. Then you can say, well, hey, we've been overcrediting. If we continue to overcredit knowingly and grossly overcredit, I'm not saying that's being done. I'm saying if that's what's found out, if for some practices in certain situations, we're not going to get the results no matter how much money we put into this, you know, to these type of things. So this is that, to me, it's at the heart of, you know, taking this research, testing, and then putting it into practice. If we don't change that part of it, the policies, you know, we might as well not even do the work up front on step and testing and whatnot. I don't know, does that answer? Okay. I don't know if I'd love to.
I think that having step in place would make it easier to change some of these manuals. We're unique here in Minnesota with the Wiki Stormwater Manual. It's quite flexible in a way that many other state manuals are not. They're like written down and published and then updated every 10 to 20 or never years.
True. That is true.
And having a central source of consistent, standardized data that everybody is going to will allow them to more easily go up, pull those numbers down, and insert them in a manual update. A lot of us are in public service. We know that you don't turn the ship overnight, you know. So if new numbers on treatment were to be published, and I think that having a national program rather than, you know, kind of locally or in research papers would allow some of that information to get out more easily. It would probably be 10 years before it's widely distributed, 5 to 10 years realistically. But that's going back to what Seth said. Once you know, we have to make that change. You know, we have to do it based on these based on the actual performance. And getting better data will allow us to know how much more clean the water is getting, and then have more wins that we can talk about. And that's ultimately the goal, is clean waters for everyone. And we want to be good stewards of the public dollar to get there.
All right, we'll take an in-person question from Randy.
So, characteristic fashion, I'm going to cheat on the process. I'm not going to ask a question. I want to make a comment, particularly about Seth's work on STEP, because he's far too modest to say it himself. He made the comment that if several years ago, the STEP process was transferred to NMSA. What that really means is that Seth took over leadership of the process. He brought people to the table. He got people who never agree on anything to agree on a bunch of things. He made the connection to ASTM. I've been close enough to the work to appreciate how challenging it is, how detailed it is, and as we all know, the devil's in the details. STEP has made progress in the last 3 years or so that a lot of people never thought was possible. And it's largely, not entirely, God knows, but very largely due to Seth's work. And that should be appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you, Randy. I get your lunch today, right? Okay.
You say that knowing that Andy already will.
Exactly. That's how you do it. That's funny.
Well, it's going to be a tough one to follow up with a question on TSS. But I was thinking back to the seminar 2 months ago, I think it was, where we were talking about sediment footprint in BMPs. And, you know, one of the things, TSS, you know, what is it? It depends on what you're measuring, you know, what stream, it depends on the particle size distribution and the flow velocity. So when you see that something is, you know, it removes 85% of TSS, well, it depends on what you fed in, right? And I'm just thinking, could we improve our designs by clearly stating by particle size, this BMP removes 99% of, sand size particles and only 20% of silt and clay or something. Because maybe we do have to design with this sacrificial area for the silts and clays in those tight spots, instead of someone bringing in a design and saying, oh yeah, it's going to remove, this is going to take away 90% of the TSS. So thoughts on TSS?
Absolutely correct. If you dive into as a designer, if you dive into the models, multiple models have multiple particle sizes that you can choose from, and you're going to get wildly different results based on what you select. So I guess I go back to kind of where we started here, is just educating the people that are putting the model together, understanding what goes in, what comes out, and what is your goal. If it's pre-treatment, maybe you use that sand particle file and you show this amazing removal. Awesome. That's what your goal is, to remove the coarse stuff. If you're running this for a bioretention or something else, you probably don't want to use that sand file. It's probably a different particles file that's more representative of smaller particles, which are typically TSS.
The thoughts?
I'll just say that it's a great point, and I totally agree. Yeah, I can get 80%. I can get 100% if it's gravel, right? That's great. That's awesome. But and I think that has been one of those. I don't know the whole legacy, but I think a lot of it comes from wastewater, right? The TSS, and is that even the right? Is that the best metric for what we're looking at? So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done here and I think there's a lot of demystification that needs to be done by looking at, especially the proprietary side. What does 80% TSS removal mean? What do you really mean when you say that? And when we test, we can say, yeah, these are the particle size distributions that were used. Well, okay, so how does that relate to other types of particle size distributions that can that can vary widely, looking at street and urban grit, that's a different thing than we're looking at other kind of, runoff particle size distributions and areas that are outside of that or beyond that. So I think that's my hope is, and on my rambling is that my hope is that STEP can help to demystify and answer that in a better way, to make, again, better informed or more informed decisions. Because you're right, there's a lot of let's just throw 80% TSS out there. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we want to be able to have more confidence in, so we don't have questions like this in the future. But it's a good point.
100% agree.
One little footnote here.
I want to make a quick plug for a project that John Chapman and I were working on, but this is his work, his part of the work, not mine. There's also a question about the density of the particles. A lot of fine particles are organic. They're not settling. We're like little rocks. And it makes a huge difference in terms of retention. And John's been working on trying to incorporate that into P8 and things like that. So there's a whole invisible realm here of TSS and organic TSS that we need to work on.
And that was part of, NURP, the National Urban Runoff Program. They measured settling velocity directly and then translated that to particle sizes. And part of that result had that inorganic, organic as a result. That affected the results. So we do have to think about that. I'm going to ask one quick question before we do our close, because it came up earlier and it's kind of come up a couple different times. And I want to get a good response. What's the role of training, education, certification of the people? We've talked about performance data. We talked about devices. Where do you see that benefits this discussion the most? Who do we need to train and what do they need to be trained on? And that can be public residents, could be stormwater staff, it could be field construction inspectors. What would you say is going to be what do we strongly need right now?
As someone who's done a lot of field construction inspections and worked with a lot of contractors and other non-stormwater inspectors, somebody touched on this earlier, how is it going into the ground? What are the subtleties that are different from the design. So I think that having well-trained and involved inspectors is key. As an example, some of these MTDs come with an internal bypass. Well, if you're not trained to look for that, then what you think you're getting is, 10,000 cubic feet of storage and treatment is actually 2,000 cubic feet. That's a big difference. Is the bypass in the right place? Did the filters get installed? That's a thing that doesn't, it happens. It happens. Like 3 years for a project to get the filters installed. So these are the kind of things that I do think inspectors and contractors as well need to be trained on. Like a designer specs a certain MTD or a certain practice. Well, come bid time, they're gonna bid it and then ask to make a replacement product that is similar. Does it have the same performance profile? Not always. And so the inspectors and the engineers need to be aware of that when they're reviewing this kind of stuff. So I think that's where a lot of the training needs to be.
I could not agree more with that. If a practice isn't installed correctly, it's not going to function correctly. I think from the design end, we have a lot of, dedicated stormwater professionals that are keeping up to date with technology, with everything that's going on. But if it's not installed correctly, it could be almost worthless. I think the other place where we're seeing some deficits is we've talked a lot about, public BMPs and, public infrastructure, but we see a lot, we have 20 years in Minneapolis of private property BMPs, those really small ones, and understanding who's doing that maintenance and is it being done. It's, it's not necessarily the property manager or a trained professional. It's maybe the guy with the keys that's on the site. Are we providing them enough knowledge and training to keep those BMPs, appropriately maintained, to understand if they're failing, to just understand how they function?
Are they aware that they have a BMP?
They know what they have.
Yeah.
Supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's the route I was going to go with. Serious. I mean, so much of our discussion has been MTDs or, underground sort of practices. There's a recent example in one of the watersheds that I work with of the city made the decision, no, we really don't think that practice would be appropriate there because the owner is a nonprofit. And if they happen to have budget problems, I'm getting very specific here, but maintenance or forgetting about that could be a very easy thing that just drops off of their list.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just say in conversations that I've had with, like in the Northeast, for instance, I know that there's some programs there where they're trying, their messages and on the topic of O&M, which I think is right. We need training for O&M. I mean, again, because we can idealize things. Oh, well, we keep on putting in new facilities and expect that to solve our problems. What about maintaining what we have and having proper maintenance? That could be the most cost-effective BMP out there, frankly. But they're charting. There's some places within the Northeast that are trying to look at. Let's look at what maintenance trucks we have. How much staff do we need? Focus on that and have designs and our operations be tailored to that so that we can actually not hope that it's going to happen, but we can have some more assurance that it will happen and then focus a lot of our training on that. I mean, there's designs and yada, yada, but at the end of the day, if we don't install these correctly, maintain them, then as has been said here, it doesn't matter how well they perform in ideal conditions. Ideal conditions are ideal. The world is not ideal by any stretch. So I think a lot of training needs to be provided for kind of on the ground maintenance and installation construction.
And I think, it kind of reflects, I always like to think of it as a three-legged stool. If you don't have good design, it's probably not going to work. If you're not constructing it properly, it's probably not going to work. If you don't maintain it in the long term or operate it properly, it's probably not going to work. The stool is going to tip over at some point. So we're going to move into our closing. Thank you for sticking with us. And my closing question for each of our panelists is this: what key takeaways do you have from our discussion today? It can be something you want to re-emphasize or re-highlight. It could be something new that maybe we didn't get to talk about yet, but what are going to be your key takeaways from today's discussion? I'm going to start on this side with Luke, and we'll work our way down to Seth. Please take it away.
I have 3 key takeaways I was thinking about. The first is being able to compare apples to apples is critical. Seth made this point really well. Testing under similar conditions is essential so that we know what we're installing and how they compare to each other. Second is collaboration between the states and then between regulators and manufacturers and practitioners is necessary to improve and expand on the available stormwater treatment technologies. If we're all operating in our own bubble and our own silo, we're not going to learn from others and have our knowledge expanded. And then finally, something that I think Seth made a really nice point on earlier is that local involvement in these national issues is necessary so that we can enhance investment in stormwater treatment and infrastructure.
Liz, what are your key takeaways?
For me, it was, looking at having a consistent and standardized, just data and approach for looking at all of these BMPs, making sure that, as Luke said, we're comparing apples to apples. We're looking at them in just a very consistent way. That helps, make informed decision making. Are we putting the best BMP in the best place? And the only way we can make that determination is if we have, consistent standards, consistent testing, understanding consistent, operations, consistent maintenance. That really helps make it that kind of informed decision making that at the end of the day, with us being, stewards of tax dollars, helps us be good stewards.
For me, I think I'll give a shout out to Mike Trojan and his team at the MPCA with building out the MTD evaluation design page a couple of years ago. If folks are not aware of it, it's out there to use. It's a very useful page to assist in design and evaluation of those. We've talked a lot about MTDs, and to build off of Liz's comment, there's a lot of good guidance there that MPCA recognized a need and reacted and has really delivered a useful guide there for us. Mm-hmm. Secondly, there's a National Stormwater Day, November 16th.
Who knew?
I was not aware of that.
Who knew? I know. Yeah. I know. Yeah, that's it. Okay. I can't follow up on that one. Well, yes. Okay. So my first point is there's a National Stormwater Day. No, I won't. That point's been made. No, I agree with the work that Mike did, and that has been very helpful. And I would say on the national, I agree that that I spend most of my time trying to convince people that what's happening at the national level does have some relevance locally, and I appreciate that. And I think the great work that Randy's done and Nipesh has done. You're not buying my lunch, so I'm just saying. No, but it's true, and we need leadership that way. But the three topics or the three thoughts that I want to end with here is that performance and caring about performance. I think it's the value proposition. Again, we need to be stewards. We've heard this several times, but we can't say it enough that you can't expect the public or anyone to invest in something if you don't have some confidence that it performs, right? So it's a value proposition. So we should think about that. The second is that as we move forward in something like STEP and other similar type of efforts, it's not going to be perfect. Now, hopefully there's some patience in the fact that this is going to be a house that's going to be built over time. So it's not going to be perfect, but if we wait for perfection, it's never going to happen. And that's my last point, is that it's going to take some time. As has been noted, it's been a long time it's gotten us into this mess. It's going to take time to get out, but we're never going to get there if we don't start walking that path forward. So I do think it's hard to say, is it getting better or worse? I think the fact that we're having these conversations reflect that it's getting better, because we'll get there. So.
Nothing else. More people are thinking about it and trying to solve the problem, right? We're working together. So I want to thank you all for joining us today for the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. I want to first thank our keynote speaker, Seth Brown, at the far end. I want to thank our panelists for serving on the panel. I want to thank you, the audience, both in person and online, for joining us today. I encourage you to check out our website and look for future Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series events. Hopefully you will tune in on some of those. And with that, I would like a round of applause to thank everyone for being here. Thank you so much.